Today, I am ranking my 5 best horror movies of 2025 so far. Since we're right on the horizon of spooky season, I thought this was the perfect time to recap the year so far and talk about some of my favorite releases up to this point. Now, before I get started, let me get this out of the way. First and foremost, obviously, this is just my opinion. So I'm sharing a totally subjective list. If you agree or disagree with anything, then leave me a comment, let me know, and we can discuss. Second, I'm going to provide a list on screen right now of all the horror movies I've seen in 2025. So if there's a certain movie that you loved this year and you're not seeing it on this list, don't be mad when I don't put it in my top 5. I can't rank a movie if I haven't seen it yet. It's been a pretty productive year for me in terms of getting to the theaters and seeing these new releases, but obviously I can't see everything. So I'm sure there's a couple of big ones that I'm missing. One in particular that I know a lot of people loved is Bring Her Back. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to catch that one, so I won't be able to rank it. But with all that out of the way, let's get into this. And I want to start with a few honorable mentions because the fifth and final spot on my list was actually pretty hard to narrow down. I had to choose between a couple different movies. And I also want to say that there's only a handful of horror movies that I've seen this year that I didn't find at least some enjoyment from. There's only a couple stinkers. So basically, if there's anything on this list that isn't in the top 5 or even in my honorable mentions, it doesn't necessarily mean that I hated it. Like I said, I enjoyed most of the movies that I've seen this year. If you don't see something pop up, it just didn't make the cut because I didn't like it enough. So I'd say my 2 biggest honorable mentions in 2025 are going to be Clown in a Cornfield and Hard Eyes. I really loved Hard Eyes. I think if the ending had just been 15% better, then I would have had it in my top 5 or maybe even my top 4. I thought the chemistry between our 2 leads was really great, and I already loved both of these actors on their own, so seeing them together was just an automatic win. I thought the comedy in this movie worked really well for me. When the movie finally gets to the kills, it does deliver on some solid action and gore. So again, the only problem for me was I was pretty underwhelmed with the big reveal in the final act. It just didn't land for me. Other than that, though, Hard Eyes was great. As for Clown in a Cornfield, again, the comedy in this one really worked for me. It's been a good year for horror comedy, if I can say. And I know that there's kind of a challenge balancing these two genres, but I thought Clown in a Cornfield, for the most part, nailed it. I was laughing for a good amount of the runtime, and I still felt some of the tension during the scarier parts. Now, this is nowhere near being a very scary movie at all, but overall it worked for me. I thought Clown in a Cornfield was just a fun, fall-coated horror movie that just barely misses my top 5. Now moving into my actual list, coming in at number 5, I thought really hard about this, and while I don't love everything about this movie, I couldn't in good faith leave 28 years later outside of my top 5. Now look, I think this movie has plenty of problems. The ending, even if you explain the cultural reference to my American brain, where you tell me that it's from the perspective of a child, it still doesn't work for me. All right, it's still too damn goofy. I will wait and see how it goes in Bone Temple. I'm still invested in watching the rest of this trilogy, but the ending to me, it just didn't work. I think this franchise, I mentioned it in my review of this movie, but I want to see the horror in this franchise. I think that's where they're at their best. A single drop of blood in this universe can infect you, so I don't want to see the Power Rangers doing backflips and killing the infected like it's a game. That's just not the tone that I wanted. With that said, the reason why this is in my top 5 is because I think this movie has bits and pieces of being a 10 out of 10 film. The first trip to the mainland is incredibly tense. It gave me this sick anxiety feeling throughout the entirety of it. The tone shifts push and pull you in different directions, but for the most part, they worked for me. I specifically liked Ray Fiennes' character. I'm excited that he's going to be returning in the sequels. And the coming-of-age premise with Spike trying to take his mother into the mainland is something that I could totally get on board with. It's very endearing and heartwarming, the relationship between these two characters. And I will say I don't think this movie fully delivers on Spike's development, being someone who can survive on his own in the mainland by the end of the film. But the general premise was still a really sweet story. And I think it's an okay start to the trilogy. Where are they going to go from here? I have no idea after that ending, but I'm still going to be showing up to find out. So again, this one was difficult for me because, the lows of this movie are not very good, but the highs in 28 years later are up there with some of the best on this list. So I figured just placing it at 5th makes the most sense for me. And it might be controversial, so let me know in the comments your thoughts on this one. Moving into number 4, I have to go with Together, starring Dave Franco and Alison Brie. I was not expecting this movie to be actually scary. Like, don't get me wrong, there's plenty of comedy. There's probably more comedy than horror for most of the runtime, but there's some genuinely frightening moments, especially in the nightmare sequences, and it just had a lot more tension than I was expecting. I don't really watch trailers for horror movies. I like to go in as blind as I possibly can, so everything that I saw about this movie gave me the vibe that it was going to be a horror comedy. And so I dragged my girlfriend to come see this because even though she doesn't like scary movies, I was like, I don't think it's going to be that scary. It might be a little gross, but I think it's mainly going to be funny. And I was wrong. So I may have lost her trust for that one. But focusing on the actual movie, you can call me cliche, but whenever you can take a complex human emotion or an internal conflict and you represent that in a metaphorical way using horror, then I'm a big fan. I love that shit. I know some people are turning on elevated horror as a genre, but it's still something that works for me. And in all honesty, this genre has always reflected humanity's anxieties and fears. That's like a well-documented trend. So it's always been about trauma and inner fears for the most part. You get the goofy stuff too, but together focuses on codependent relationships, and the two characters that we get to me were very fascinating because they're both toxic and dependent in their own unique way. I don't think either one of them is meant to be the outright villain. I just think there's so many layers to the relationship that you can interpret their dynamic in so many different ways. And this is a movie that you will be thinking about for days on end after watching it. Like I said, the two people in this relationship, neither one of them comes across like they're intentionally trying to be bad to the other person. Neither one of them is really the villain, in my opinion, but they certainly aren't good for each other anymore. But letting go, it can be hard and scary after you've poured, I think a decade into the relationship in this movie. And so that causes all sorts of problems. And I thought this movie portrayed all of that in a creative way that made me feel a range of emotions watching it. So this one comes in at fourth on my list. Moving to number 3, this one might be way too high up on my list, but I have no shame about this one. Final Destination Bloodlines is one of the most fun movies I've seen all year. I laughed so much through all of this, and I'll get this out of the way right at the top. The third act of this movie is lacking. The third act is one of the weakest in the franchise. It does not land the plane in any way. And I mean, let's be honest, this franchise isn't known for landing planes, if you know what I mean. But the final set piece of this movie, not only is it unexciting, but it also just makes no sense because the characters, they're like, oh, we need to go somewhere safe, somewhere where death can't get us. And then they choose this place. I'll put it on screen right now. This is the place that they go. And you don't even have to be in a Final Destination movie to suffer a horrific death if you're at this place. If you're just even a little bit clumsy, death is going to get your ass if you're over here. There's way too many things that could go wrong. But third act aside, I'll just say this is easily the best sequel in the franchise, in my opinion. And it might deliver on the best hour and a half of these movies that we've gotten. The opening premonition is unique and wild. All of the kills are phenomenally set up. This movie, it plays with your expectations and toys with the audience in a way that only a sequel of Final Destination could, right? Because you couldn't have set up all these fake out deaths and mess with the audience in the original movie in the way that we do in this one, because we have a decade's worth of tropes now that exist from this franchise that I think Bloodlines uses to perfection. And basically, like I said, it's a perfect Final Destination movie for the first hour and a half before the final act kind of holds it back quite a bit. Everything else leading up to that, though, was such a fun roller coaster ride that I was fully on board with, and I did not expect the sixth Final Destination movie to be this much fun. So while I think Together is a scarier and more thoughtful movie, I think 28 Years Later is even scarier and more thoughtful. Final Destination Bloodlines was just such a blast to watch in theaters that I have to put it in third place. Moving into my top 2 spots, I want to clarify something right away. I think you can swap these two movies out for each other depending on what you're looking for from a horror movie. If you want something scary, then you might choose one of these. If you're looking for what I would consider the best all-around film that I've seen this year that also happens to have horror elements in it, then you might go another way. So again, you can flip this around whichever way you want, but for me, I'm going number 2, Weapons. Now, Zach Cregger makes the type of movies where it feels like you've been blindfolded and pushed down a flight of stairs in the best way possible. I understand that people don't like the tonal whiplash of his movies. They don't work for everyone, but I'll just say this type of filmmaking is perfect for me, I guess. Whatever Cregger works with, it just tickles a part of my brain that has me locked in for whatever this dude does next. I'm going to keep this one pretty brief because this movie just came out, and I think, again, it's best to go into this one completely blind, but I love the way that the story in Weapons is told. The narrative is very broken up, and we get all these tonal whiplashes throughout. Each vignette in this story felt unique while still connected to the larger story, and I've seen some people say that, certain characters like the cop or the junkie, they should have just been cut or removed from this film altogether. Honestly, those stories gave me some of my favorite moments in the film. I think having the occasional break in tension is really effective in these movies because you might have some moments where everything feels fun and lighthearted. You're just kind of coasting around, but then you're going to turn around a corner and you're going to get flung upside down any second. So watching Weapons in a packed theater was a lot of fun for me. I thought some of the earlier scenes in the film were incredibly effective and scary, specifically where one character falls asleep in the car. That one had people in my theater straight up screaming. And it's really hard for me not to put this movie at number 1 because it was really that great, but sadly for weapons, there's another movie that I think rises above, and I just can't deny that Sinners is the best horror movie of the year so far. Now, I know Sinners is not as horror coded as some of the other films on here, but damn it, it's got vampires in it. It's still hands down the best movie I've seen in 2025, and I know there's a lot of people out there who they set their expectations way too high because of all the praise for this movie. And so when they finally got to watch it, they felt underwhelmed. And I want to address that for a second with a very brief rant. So, two things on this point. One, look, man, you got to manage your expectations when a movie comes out. All right. When there's a lot of hype around a movie, you see this every time. People go into it, their expectations are so high that the movie is never going to live up to it. And they end up disappointed 9 out of 10 times. Now, I will say I had my expectations pretty high for Sinners and I was still blown away, but that's not going to happen for everyone. So, be responsible, manage your expectations, don't set yourself up for disappointment. Number two, if you saw this movie for the first time and it was on HBO Max with commercial breaks every 5 minutes, then I'm sorry, you just didn't experience it the same way that someone like myself did who saw it in IMAX on opening night. That's not meant to diss anybody, it's just the truth. If you watched it on a smaller screen, alone in your room, and you were scrolling through TikTok during ad breaks, then it's just not going to hit the same, right? And I think it's important to keep in mind the experience that you had watching the film because that's going to affect how you review it. And so with all that said, I'll just speak for myself. Sinners, it absolutely banged. Ryan Coogler, Michael B. Jordan, they're at the peak of their powers in this movie. The cinematography, the performances across the board, it's all incredible. Miles Canton delivers an all-time great debut acting performance right here. Like, this kid is genuinely amazing. I can't wait to see what he does next. And the cast is just loaded with great performances from start to finish. It's a period piece that fully immerses you into 1930s Louisiana. I know some people wish that this movie would have kept its tone from the first half instead of turning into a vampire movie, but all that character and world building early on is what makes the heel turn so effective, in my opinion. At least for me, I was so bought into these characters having the best night of their lives before the vampires show up that I think it's really important that this first act builds into that musical scene in the juke, because that type of communal atmosphere is something that you needed to create before you could see Preacher Boy break the space-time continuum, right? Like, you really had to buy in that there was all this chemistry and energy in the air when you start to see the ghosts of past and future all combined. So obviously the movie, it's rich with commentary on colonialism, the weaponization of religion, among a bunch of other things. To me, this film is all about finding your freedom through artistic expression rather than religion or vengeance. So, for example, Preacher Boy, he has to choose, right? Either to join the vampires, which would be vengeance, or follow his father's footsteps as a religious man of the church. And ultimately, he chooses neither, right? Instead, he lives his life as a musician. He chooses true freedom. And that, to me, is the biggest theme of the film. Obviously, there's a lot more to it, but that's just my favorite part of it, my favorite interpretation, at least. And yeah, I mean, the vampires are cool as hell once they make their presence known. Remick, I thought, was a great villain. I love the effects with their eyes that are kind of glowing. Really, this is just an old-fashioned vampire movie, but it's infused with the best that we have in modern filmmaking, and it somehow manages to take these social messages that are from the 1930s, but are still pretty relevant today. And so for that, Sinners is my top movie of 2025 so far. But let me know in the comments what your top 5 is. I would love to talk with all of you, so don't forget to drop a like and hit the subscribe button while you're there. Thank you for watching my video, and I'll have more coming soon.